morning all. Let's start with assertions today. So here we need to know why we need assertions, what are the assertions are available in SOAP UI to do web service testing. So mainly why we will use assertions. So once a request is sent to the web server and a response is received. So when we receive a response, we need to validate if the response contains the data what we expect. So in order to validate the response, we need to use assertions. So this is our request and this is our response. Here I am not sending any data to the server. For example, here I have given sector. There are multiple sectors are available, so I'm giving sector A. When I send the request, this request is went to the web server and we receive the response. So here in our response we can see fault code is server and our fault string is bad input sector, and we have received the details. So here to validate the response, whatever response we received, if the response is valid or not, and whatever data we received that is expected or not, to validate all each and every element data in the response, we will use assertions. So if you see here, we have assertions for this request. So these assertions, whatever assertions we keep, these assertions will be applicable for this test step only in the test case. If I click on assertions, here by default we can see one assertion, that is SOAP response. This is the latest SOAP UI version, that is SOAP UI 5.4.0. So here we can see by default assertion, that is SOAP response. For example, if you people are using old versions before SOAP UI 5.4.0 like SOAP UI 4, SOAP UI 5, if you use that, we will not get any default assertions. But in latest version, we will get the by default assertion, that is SOAP response. What does this mean is, here SOAP response valid, that means whatever response we receive, it will validate the structure of the response. So by default, SOAP UI request, SOAP request as SOAP response, they will follow the default structure. For example, if you look into the request, the request format should be SOAP envelope. In that header, in that body should contain the data, and this is the default structure. By default, if anyone asks us what is the SOAP UI request structure, we can say first envelope, after that header, after that body. In body we should have the content, whatever data we want to send to the server. Coming to the SOAP UI response, the structure should be SOAP envelope. In that body, the response whatever response we received from the server. At the same time, if we have any errors, any fault codes or fault details, it should be under body only. So under body we should have response and fault code both. But here, why it has passed? By default the structure is looking good, envelope, body and fault, because whatever fault we received, it is under structure only. So by default whatever structure has follow the SOAP envelope, that is the structure we received. That is the reason this by default assertion has passed. I can show you one more request. I will add step. I'm adding one more request. If you find anything looks different, so here I'm adding some city names. Okay, click on OK. Here we have another request. Here we have to send display level and it is integer. So I don't know what data we need to send, but I'm sending, as it is integer, I'm sending some number 10. I'm sending the request to the server and see what. Here also, if you see, the assertion response is valid, because here also the structure is like SOAP envelope. In that body if you see here, city name response, in that we have list land out. In that we have received some junk response, but still we can see the response structure. SOAP response structure has followed the standard. That is the reason again it has passed. So we need to keep in mind that whenever we run the request, by default SOAP UI tool itself will validate our SOAP response structure, and this assertion by default should pass. If it fails, that means whatever structure we received, it is invalid SOAP structure. So this is by default first assertion. If we want to add to validate the response, we can add multiple assertions to this test step. So before adding any of the assertion, I can explain you what are the assertions are available in SOAP UI. So the available assertions, first one is, there are in SOAP UI, we can say there are different assertion categories. In each assertion category, different assertion types are available. So to that, first manually I will explain what are the assertions are available, then we can look into the practical. So first one is property content. This is the first assertion, and second assertion is compliance status standard, and third one is script assertion. That means we can validate the response using Groovy script as well. Fourth one is SLA, service level agreement. So response SLA, here we can is for response SLA to validate the response. Fifth one is JMS. This one will validate JMS status and this JMS out timeout. This one is for JMS request and responses, but it's not that much useful, but we can know what it is because these all assertion categories are available with the tool. So that is the reason we should know each and everything what all are available. Sixth one is JDBC. Seventh one is security. So here we have these many assertions, right? But when we work practically, what are the assertions mainly used and everyone used in their projects? So first one here is property content. So this one we can look into in detail in practical. So before that, what are the assertions we will not use, and we can look into the theory of those. Another one is compliance status standard. Compliance status standard means it has multiple assertion categories are available. In this compliance status standard assertion category, multiple assertion types are available. In that, frequently used assertions are invalid status code and valid status codes. So here I can say mainly used assertions are invalid HTTP status codes and valid HTTP status codes. These two assertions we will use manually. And next one is script assertion. This means this script allows users to execute a custom script to perform user defined validations. So if I want to validate fault code, fault string, fault actor, detail and envelope, and in body also we have multiple data what we received from the response. If I not able to validate that using the existed assertions, in that case we can write our own script to validate the response. Then we will use script assertions, and we have to write Groovy script to validate the response. And another one is response SLA. Response SLA means it validates the response if the response time of the last received response was within the defined limit. So this one we will use it rarely, because this is somewhat like what can I say, like it validates the response time of the last received response within the defined limit. So there are some default settings we have where we can see the like time range. If I run the request and it should receive the response from the server, so how much time it took. So to validate the response time limits it will use, but because in our framework level also we can see how much time it took for each and every test case execution. Like for one test case can have multiple test steps. To complete one test case execution it can take 1 minute or 2 minutes, and for each step also it can take some different some minute some seconds like that. So that one we can handle it to program itself. And another one is JMS status and JMS timeout. So here JMS status verifies if the JMS request of the test step has executed success and holds good for test steps within a JMS endpoint. That means like these JMS status, JMS timeout we will not use, because here we are working with the SOAP request and response, not with the JMS status and the JMS timeout. So both will handle with the JMS status will verifies with the JMS request, and JMS timeout it handles with the JMS response of the particular test step. So rarely we will not use work with SOAP. And another one is JDBC. This is related to the backend database. This mainly using which we can assert if the web service has updated the database correctly. So it's related with the database. So when it coming to this OPI, when we want to validate whatever response we received from the server, if you want to validate with the database, then JDBC will come into the picture. So here mainly we will validate our responses with the Excel sheet, because every time we have to validate the expected result with the actual results. So when we are using assertions, we should know the expected results, then only we can validate. So it should be either with the database, it should be either with the requirements. So anyway we have to validate the response with the requirements only. As per testing life cycle, whatever requirements we received from the BS like business analysts and our top from requirement phase, whatever requirements we received, we need to validate our responses with the requirement. So in that requirement maybe we came to know like we need to validate the response with the database, or we need to validate with the requirement itself, then there is no relation with the database. In that case by default we will create we can create our expected results in Excel sheet. By default we can validate our responses with the Excel sheet. That is one way. And another way is like we need to connect to the database, and we should retrieve the data using queries, select star from particular table or select particular column names from table. Once we retrieve the data from the database, then we can validate the response with that data. So we have multiple combinations to validate the responses. So when it's required we need to validate with the database, then we will use JDBC assertion. Okay. So mainly most of the projects we will validate the responses with the Excel sheets, because if for example I have 100 test cases, for 100 test cases in Excel sheet I will create the expected test results for each and every test case, what data we should receive, what data we can expect. All the data we will keep it in Excel sheet based on the test case names. Referring with the test case names, whatever data we are sending in the request in test data Excel sheet, whatever data we are receiving, whatever data we are expecting in another Excel sheet. So we will validate expected result with the actual result using Excel sheet. So to read the Excel sheet we will use Apache Point to read the data from the Excel sheet. So validate the data in Excel sheet. So to read the data from the Excel sheet, we will use Apache POI, and to validate the response with JDBC with the database like SQL or Oracle, so we need to connect with the database. So here to validate the response with the backend servers, then we will use JDBC. So this is very important concept, but mainly we will use using Groovy script only. We will read the data from the Excel sheet and we will validate. We will keep it in assertions and we will validate. Another assertion point is security. So this is also very important, but it is related to sensitive information exposure. So it verifies if the response message does not expose sensitive information about the target system. We can use this assertion for REST, SOAP and HTTP test steps. These all are the theory about the assertions. What are the assertion types are available. We can see practically all these assertions when we will use, how we will use. Here we can see plus icon, that is adds an assertion to this item. That means whatever assertions we add, it will be applicable for this test case test step, for this one step only. We have to click on plus symbol here. Here you see what all are the assertions I explained till now. First one is property content, and another one is complaint status and standards, another one is script, SLA, service level agreement, JMS, JDBC, security. These all are assertion categories. In assertion categories, we can see the assertion types. So the first one is recently used. That means here we have different assertions, right? If I used any one frequently, by default all will come under recently used. Here contains, not contains, expose, these are the different assertion types available. But why it come under recently used means, if I used any one of the assertion from property content or complaint status and standard or SLA, from SLA, all will come under recently used, which we used frequently. That is the meaning of recently used, because no need to go to the particular one and can search. Coming to the first assertion category, that is property content. If you look into property content assertion category, these all are assertion types are available. In this you can see first one is contents, and another one is JSON path content, JSON path existence match, JSON path match, JSON path regular expression match, and not contents, XPath match, XQuery match. Here our query should be, why these assertions, some of the assertions are in disable mode? Because here we are validating the assertion SOAP request and SOAP responses. To validate the SOAP response, the structure should be like XML. JSON path count, JSON path existence match, JSON path means. In our previous classes we discussed about REST protocol. When it is REST, we can send the request. Two types of requests we can send. One is XML request and another one is JSON request. When we use JSON request, then we can use these assertion categories. That is JSON path count, JSON path existence match, JSON path match, JSON path regular expression match. So here we are using XML. So that is the reason here remaining all are disable mode. In property content, mainly we will use contains, not contains, XPath match, XQuery match. These four are available. In that mainly we will use XPath match, because that is very important to validate our responses. So here we can look into the first one is contains. What it will do is, contains, it searches for the existence of a string token in the property value, supports regular expressions applicable to any property. So first I will try this one, contains. contains, we have to click on add. Here we can give the content. For example, I can check, I'm typing some information server and I clicked on OK. We can see valid. So because what contains it will do, it will validate the whatever string here we defined, it has in the response or not. It will check. So click on plus button. Here you can read content. Search for the existence of a string token in the property value. So that means it checks cancel because already content failed to add assertion. Okay. So here contents I added server. So I will change it something different. We can see what it defines. Here it has failed. Missing token server 311 in the response. So content simply validates whatever data we provided in the content box, should it be in the response or not. For example, I will write here bad input sector. It has passed because it has bad input sector. Simply we have to remember that contents means whatever data we provided in the content text box, it should be in response. If it's not there, it will be failed. That is the use of contains assertion. Moving to the another one, not contains. So as we are learning, we can come into the assertion category and we can select it instead of using recently used, because then only we will come to know whatever assertion type is under which assertion category. Here not contains. Here searches for the non-existence of a string token in the property value. That means it should not contain. If I give here server, we can see when it has failed because it shouldn't contain. If server I have given, it has contained in the response, that means it has failed. So if I give here server 123, it has passed because contains opposite is not contains, not contains opposite is contains, not contains it should not contain. Server 123, it shouldn't be there in the response. So that is the reason this assertion also passed. Okay, and moving to the another assertion, that is export. If I click on plus button, every time whenever we want to add a assertion, we need to click on this plus button. So here going to the property content. In the property content mainly we have 4 assertions: contains, not contains, we already discussed, and another one is export match and exquery match, which are very important and frequently used. One is export first, after that exquery match. So to know the export match, here is read uses an export expression to select content from the target property and compares the result to an expected value applicable to any property containing XML. So export match, click on add. So if you here pop-up will be displayed like this. This is export match configuration. In here you can see specify export expression and expected result. Here they were saying like declare namespaces with declare namespace prefix equal something. Here export expression, declare and expected result. So here before adding export, we need to declare the namespace. Okay, to declare the namespace, what we need to do is we need to know what is an XML, what is namespace. So an XML namespace is a collection of names identified by a URI. URI means that is the reference we will use, that is uniform resource identifier, which are used in XML documents as the element and attribute names. The same is used in SOAP UI export assertion. So to declare XML namespace, here we need to click on declare button, which would do the job for us, else we can also manually declare a namespace ourselves. There are 2 ways. We can click on declare button. If you click on declare button, every time these 2 namespaces will add. Otherwise we can give it manually. So by default these 2 will come. Otherwise we can delete and simply click on declare button. Okay. After declaring the namespace, what we need to do is we need to refer the XPath using the created namespace. So here adding one more point, after clicking on the declare button, two namespaces will pop up as we have two URI. Two URIs means Uniform Resource Identifier. Here one namespace is for, here you can see one is enveloping and another one is encoding. That means one is for schema URL and another one is for the actual web service URL. We need to use the actual namespace where the web service is located and not the schema namespace while referring XPath. So next what we need to do is we need to enter the XPath of the XML node that we need to validate. So for example, so here if we look into the response here, so here I want to validate the fault code. Here we received the fault code as server. So I need to validate whatever fault code we received, it should match with the expected result. So to declare the XPath, we need to give the node. So because we need to enter the XPath of the XML node that we need to validate. So here I am giving what we want to do, we want to validate the fault code whatever we received in the fault code. So here I am giving / fault code. Here this is the syntax we have to follow. Once I have written like this, so I need to know whatever data it contains fault code element. Here in expected result we can see select from current server. Here what is this expected result? Here we have to give the expected results, but here I am validating the response after we ran the request. This is because we are explaining here, that is the reason I ran the request, I received the response. To validate the response I am giving the expected result here. So that is the reason here we have some of the features that we can click on select from current. That means whatever data we received in the fault code element. So that is the reason when we click on select from current, we can read here, when we keep cursor here, select the XPath expression from the current message into the expected content field. So here we have the response, that is the reason we have received the select from the current from the response, that is server. In fault code we can see the server. So because before running our test cases we need to keep our assertions, because we will not keep assertions after running the response, because in software testing lifecycle, before execution starts we have to keep our XMLs ready. That is our request, what we have to keep our requests ready, because for example in agile methodology, if we have one CR to test, that is change request, if you want to test one change request, in that change request maybe I have created 20 test cases. So before execution phase only we need to ready with our 20 test requests, because 20 test case means we have to create 20 test cases. 20 test case means we have to create 20 test cases. So to validate our 20 test cases we need to ready with our 20 requests. At the same time we need to be ready with our 20 responses as well. So response means that is our expected results. So when before running only we need to keep ready with our assertions as well. So in that case by default, without clicking on select from current, because anyway we have not executed because it's not in execution phase, before that only in design phase only we are keep ready with all our data and everything. So in that case manually we can enter, I don't know, I'm expecting fault code should be server. So that is the reason we have to provide here. For example, here fault code, that means if I assume that 4000 should come, I can give it manually and click on save. It has failed because after running it should fail, because we are expecting fault code should be server, but I have given here is 4000. Okay, so I will remove here, and as I know server, I'm giving and save. Here you can see assertion 4 is passed. That is the importance of the assertions. So if I click here, if I want to validate, some fault string. What can I do? Fault string. So select from current, I reset bad input sector, click on save. So these exports are very important, and we have to look into the very depth, because here we have only SOAP fault we are validating, but when we have SOAP response, in that multiple data we have received, so we need to validate how many, like for example I can say like there are multiple data we received in that like for example fault code I have only once. If I have 2 times, if I have 3 times, if I have 4 times, I have to validate each and every fault code. So then we need to look into the depth of exports, and exports itself will take 1 hour to explain, because these are very important to validate our responses. So moving to the another assertion, property content, contains, not contains, XPath match and XQuery match. So what is XQuery match? So here XQuery match is similar to XPath match assertions. As we have seen in the XPath match assertion configuration, there will be 2 sectors here, as we have seen in XPath also, like one is declaration 1, another one is we can double click on XPath match itself. As we said, there are two sections we can say. One is declaration 1 and another one is expected result 1. In XQuery match also we can see the same. So the difference between XPath and XQuery match is like cancel, fail to add assertion, clicking here and come to the property content, clicking on XQuery match. Here you can see what is XQuery match is uses an XQuery expression to select content from the target property and compares the result to an expected value applicable to any property containing XML. Only the difference is that is XPath expression, this should be an XQuery expression. So here you can see this is XQuery expression and this is expected result, same as XPath match only. So in XQuery declaration it has its own syntax, that is nothing but like own scripting syntax to validate in using XQuery match. So mostly we will use XPath match only, but we need to know what is XQuery match and what is the difference between XPath match and XQuery match. And moving to the another assertion category, that is compliance status and standards. Here we can see HTTP download all resources, it is in disable because we will not use it. And another one is invalid HTTP status codes, not SOAP fault, and schema compliance, SOAP fault. Here SOAP response, that is the one by default will come here, that is the first one, SOAP response one. Validates that the last received response is a valid SOAP response applicable to SOAP test request steps only. That is the reason I told SOAP response is by default will come to validate received response is a valid SOAP response or not, because that is validates only structure of the SOAP request or response. Here we are validating the response, that is by default it is SOAP response. Another one is valid HTTP status codes, which is very important. Another one is web service related addressing response, security status. So here we can look into the two mostly used assertions, that is invalid HTTP status codes and valid HTTP status codes. What it will do is it checks that the target test step, whatever test step we executed, received an HTTP result with a status code in the list of defined codes, and it's applicable to any test step that receives HTTP message. So for example, here I am doing valid HTTP status codes. If you click on, I am clicking on add. For example, I am giving, when it has added valid HTTP status codes, cancel. I am deleting this because I have not added. So here I will add the fresh one, like click on here and for compliance status and standards, click on invalid status codes. Why it's passing by default? Oh, maybe I am clicking on double click, because here I have not mentioned anything, that is the reason it has failed. Sorry, that is the reason it has passed. For example, if I give 200, okay, sorry, invalid. If I will give 500 here, it has failed. So why, before discussing about this HTTP status codes, I will let you know the status codes. What are the status codes are available? So here if you see, there are multiple status codes are available based on the standards. We have, as per standards, there are multiple HTTP status codes. One is 100, another one is 200, 300, 400 and 500. There are series. Here in 100 we have 101, 102. There are multiple assertions, but based on the requirement, 100 means, status code 100 means it is informational. Status code 200 means it is success. Here success means when we receive the proper structure and with the response, but here we received fault code, but the structure is same, but it has only fault code. We shouldn't have response, whatever we received from the server. When we received the proper response data, for example, I send the request data sector as A, and if I receive sector related weather information, then I can say it is a valid response and status code should be 200, then it is success. 300 series means it's redirection. Redirection. So that means this means further action must be taken in order to complete the request. There should be a further action. When it is means 400 means it is client error. Client error means this request contains bad syntax or cannot be fulfilled. That is, if you see here bad input sector, maybe it will be a client error. Another one is 500 series means server error. Server error means the server failed to fulfill an apparently valid request. It may be a server error. So when it is 200, we can see it is success. That means we received the valid response as well. When it is 100, 300, 400, 500, that means it should some dependency, or it should be some informational, it should be client error, server error, anything can happen. So here, when coming to the invalid HTTP status codes, 500 is, anyway we know it is an invalid status code because it should have some error. That is the reason it is failing. If you click on valid HTTP status codes, coming to the compliance status and standards, click on valid HTTP status codes. So cancel. By default we see valid HTTP status codes 500 is not in acceptable list of status codes. Here 500 means this is also invalid. Valid HTTP status codes means here you can see response status code 500 is not in acceptable list of status codes. So 500 is not a valid status code, that is the reason it has failed. But when it comes to the invalid HTTP status codes, 500 also it is invalid list of status codes. So we need to know what are the status codes is listed for invalid and what are the status codes are listed for what are the status codes are listed for here 500 is in invalid list of status codes and 500 is not in acceptable list of status codes. So that is the reason these all are failing. I will remove these and yes, and I am removing these. So but we need to understand the it got stuck. Okay, SOAP UI got hang. Okay, meanwhile I am repeating that there are different status codes are available. One is these all are, we will call it as HTTP status codes. So when we receive the status code as 100, that means it is an informational, and when it is 200 series it is success, and when it is 300 series it is redirection, and when it is 400 series it will be client error, when it is 500 series it is server error. So depends on the HTTP status codes, we can say either it is passed or either it is failed. So sorry guys, SOAP UI got hang. So these all are the main status codes are available in our SOAP UI tool. I will close, exit SOAP UI because I will open again. It got hang, and because I want to show you I'm closing this, and in weather we have tested for corner points. This is the request, right? So here if you see, here we can see this is by default. After importing any WSDL we can see like this, authentication headers and attachments. To know the valid, to look into the assertions and everything, must and shouldly we have to create the suite, test suite 1. In that new test case we are creating test case 1, and in test case 1 we have to create the test step, that is SOAP request. Okay, in that I'm creating corner points. So this is our request. So here if I giving assertion here, sector as A, I'm receiving the response. So by default SOAP response is come. To validate the response, I'm repeating whatever we have done till now. So these all are the 7 types of assertion categories are there. For each and every assertion category there are multiple assertion types are available. So we need to validate the assertions to validate our responses. So mainly what we will use is, in property content we will use contents, not contents, export. These 3 are very mandatory, we will use frequently as well. And coming to the compliance status and standards, by default SOAP response will validate, because to validate the structure. And another important thing is valid HTTP status codes and invalid HTTP status codes. These 2 are very important. And another one is SOAP fault as well, to validate the, we shouldn't have not SOAP fault, because in our response we shouldn't have any not SOAP fault. In that case we will use not SOAP fault as well. So these all are whatever we discussed till now, it's related to the assertion concept. Mainly to remember, simply remember that we should remember the property content, compliance status standards, because frequently we will use these assertions. and in next session we can see about the properties. What are the properties are available, how to handle global properties, and how to handle test case, test suite, project level properties. Thank you all.